The morning mist clung to the mountainside like silk veils, wrapping around the ancient stone walls of Gyeongbok Palace. In the forgotten corner of the royal complex, where wild herbs grew between medicinal gardens, Min Soo-jin knelt among the dewy leaves, her fingers gentle as she harvested morning glory roots. At 18, Soo-jin possessed beauty that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Luminous skin that caught the early light, dark eyes holding depths of quiet wisdom, and movements so graceful they appeared choreographed by nature. Her simple hanbok, dyed autumn leaf color, was worn but immaculately clean, speaking of humble origins and careful pride. She had worked in the palace's medicinal gardens for 3 years, ever since her grandmother's reputation as a healer earned them a small cottage within the palace walls. While other servants gossiped about court intrigues, Soo-jin found peace among healing plants, learning their secrets, understanding their power to mend what was broken. The sound of hoofbeats thundering through the morning stillness shattered her meditation. A magnificent but riderless horse galloped past the garden wall, its saddle askew and reins trailing. Soo-jin's heart clenched. Somewhere, someone was hurt. Following instinct deeper than thought, she gathered her herb basket and hurried toward labored breathing beyond the bamboo grove. There, collapsed against an ancient pine tree, lay a figure in torn silk robes, a black silk mask covering the upper half of his face. Blood seeped through fabric at his shoulder, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. But what struck Soo-jin most was not his obvious noble bearing. It was how his exposed lips, perfectly sculpted yet vulnerable, trembled slightly with each breath, and how his strong jaw clenched against pain he refused to voice. "Sir," she whispered, kneeling beside him, her voice soft as morning rain. "You're injured." His dark eyes, visible above the silk mask, opened slowly and fixed on her face. In that moment, time suspended itself like dewdrops on spider silk. His eyes held depth she had never seen, not just pain, but loneliness so profound it made her chest ache in sympathy. "I should not be here." His voice was cultured, melodious even in weakness. "Injuries don't observe palace protocol," Soo-jin replied gently, already reaching for healing supplies. "May I?" Something in her tone, perhaps its complete lack of deference or how she looked at him as simply a person in need rather than a title to be feared, made him nod almost imperceptibly. With practiced hands, Soo-jin began tending his wounds. As she carefully cut away bloodied silk, she noticed the fabric's quality, intricate embroidery speaking of highest court ranks. Yet she said nothing, focusing on the task. "This will sting," she warned softly, applying a poultice of crushed willow bark and honey to the deep gash. He tensed but made no sound, though she saw his free hand clench against the ground. His stoicism touched something deep within her. This was a man accustomed to bearing pain alone. "You're very brave," she murmured, wrapping clean linen around the wound. "Brave?" A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "I was fleeing. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to retreat," Soo-jin replied, her fingers gentle as she secured the bandage. Even the wisest generals understand this. He studied her face with intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You speak as if you know of such things." "My grandmother taught me that healing requires understanding all kinds of wounds, those of the body and those of the spirit. Both require wisdom to treat properly." As she worked, morning light shifted through pine needles above them, casting dancing shadows across his masked features. She found herself wondering about the face hidden beneath silk, but more than that, she wondered about the pain she sensed in his soul, a hurt that ran deeper than any physical wound. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Min Soo-jin," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "And you are—" A long pause stretched between them, filled with soft sounds of the garden awakening. Birds calling to each other, distant splash of koi in the lotus pond, whisper of wind through bamboo. "Call me Jae-woon," he said finally, and she sensed this was not quite the whole truth but respected his need for privacy. "Well, Jae-woon," she said, settling back to examine her work, "you'll need to rest and let this heal properly." The cut was deep, but clean. With proper care, It should mend without complications. He struggled to sit straighter, wincing as movement pulled at his injured shoulder. I cannot stay. There are those who would. Would what? Soo-jin asked gently. Whatever danger you're fleeing, you'll be no good to anyone if you collapse from blood loss or fever. The wisdom in her words was undeniable, and something in her manner, so calm, so accepting, seemed to ease the tension holding his entire body rigid. Why are you helping me? He asked. You don't know who I am, what I might have done. Soo-jin considered this, her head tilted slightly as she studied his face. I know you're in pain. I know you're afraid. I know you're trying to be strong when you feel weak. That's enough for me to know. The simplicity of her answer, the complete absence of judgment or curiosity about his status, seemed to undo something fundamental in his chest. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked, and she saw raw vulnerability flash across his visible features. I have a small cottage at the edge of the medicinal gardens, she offered quietly. It's hidden from the main palace paths. You could rest there, at least until you're strong enough to travel safely. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition if it's freely offered, Soo-jin interrupted gently. Besides, my grandmother always said that healing someone creates a bond of responsibility. I've tended your wound. Now I must see it properly healed. Despite everything, his pain, his fear, the weight of whatever had driven him to flee, Jae-woon found himself almost smiling at her logic. There was something about this girl, with her quiet strength and matter-of-fact kindness, that made him want to trust her completely. Very well, he said softly, but only until tomorrow. 3 days passed like pages in a beloved book, each one precious, each bringing new understanding. Jae-woon's wound healed with remarkable speed under Soo-jin's careful ministrations, but neither seemed eager to acknowledge his returning strength. Each morning she would arrive with fresh herbs and clean bandages, and each morning he would find new reasons to delay departure. They fell into a rhythm natural as breathing. She would tend his wound while he told her stories of distant lands and ancient poetry, and she would share her grandmother's wisdom while preparing healing teas that tasted of mountain springs and wildflower honey. Her cottage was small and hidden, nestled between ancient oak trees with walls covered in climbing jasmine. Inside it was simple but immaculately clean, with herb bundles hanging from rafters and morning light streaming through paper windows. On the 4th morning, Soo-jin arrived to find him standing by the window, his injured arm moving freely as he reached up to touch a hanging bundle of dried lavender. The sight should have filled her with satisfaction. Her patient was healed, but instead, she felt a sharp pang of loss. You're better, she said quietly, setting down her basket of supplies. He turned to face her, and she saw her own conflicted emotions reflected in his dark eyes. Yes, he said simply. Thanks to you. The formal politeness in his tone created a distance that hadn't existed before, and Soo-jin felt something precious slipping away like water through her fingers. I should go, he continued, but made no move toward the door. Yes, she agreed, but remained where she stood. You should. They looked at each other across the small space, and the air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken words. 4 days was such a brief time, yet it felt as if they had known each other for lifetimes. Soo-jin, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. I want you to know that these days, they have been the most peaceful of my life. For me as well, she whispered, her heart breaking even as it soared. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the sandalwood scent that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. If circumstances were different, he began. But they're not, she finished gently, though the words cost her dearly. No, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. They're not. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently touched her cheek with his fingertips. The contact was electric, sending warmth racing through her entire body. I will never forget you, he said solemnly. Never forget your kindness, your wisdom, your beautiful heart. Tears she had been holding back for days finally spilled over, and he caught them with his thumb, his touch infinitely gentle. "Nor I you," she whispered. "Wherever you go, whatever you face, remember that you are worthy of love. Not for your position or your duty, but simply for who you are." For a moment she thought he might kiss her. He leaned closer, his eyes dropping to her lips, and she felt herself swaying toward him like a flower toward sunlight. But then he stopped, his jaw clenching with the effort of restraint. "I cannot," he said, his voice barely audible. "I cannot take what I cannot give back." The nobility of his restraint only made her love him more, even as it broke her heart. She nodded, understanding flooding through her even as tears continued to fall. From somewhere within his robes, he withdrew a small object and pressed it into her hands. "A token," he said, "so you know that what passed between us was real." Soo-jin looked down to see a jade pendant carved in the shape of a phoenix, hanging from a silk cord. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of master artisans, and she realized it was far too valuable for someone of humble origins to possess. "I cannot accept this," she said, trying to hand it back. "It's too precious." "Not as precious as what you gave me," he replied, closing her fingers around the pendant. "Keep it, please." Before she could protest further, he was moving toward the door, each step taking him further from her and back toward whatever fate awaited him beyond the garden walls. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at her one final time. "If you ever have need of anything, anything at all, show this pendant to any palace guard. They will know to help you." And then he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of sandalwood and the weight of the jade pendant in her palm. For weeks afterward, she threw herself into work with desperate intensity, tending the medicinal gardens with almost religious devotion. But everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of him. The pine tree where she had found him, the herbs she had used to heal his wounds, the very air that still seemed to hold echoes of his voice. 2 months later, her friend Mi Young from the palace kitchens brought news that made Soo-jin's world tilt on its axis. "There are rumors circulating through the palace," Mi Young said quietly as they sat in the garden at sunset. "They say the crown prince has been missing for weeks, that he disappeared after a hunting accident and hasn't been seen since. Some say he was injured and is recovering in secret. Others whisper that he fled the palace to avoid an arranged marriage the king was planning. They say he was last seen wearing a black silk mask, riding toward the mountains." The jade pendant, which Soo-jin wore hidden beneath her handbook, seemed to burn against her skin. With growing horror and understanding, pieces began falling into place. His noble bearing, the quality of his clothes, his educated speech, the way he had flinched when she might have recognized him. "What does the crown prince look like?" she asked carefully. Mi Young glanced around to ensure they were alone. "I've only seen him from a distance during ceremonies, but they say he's remarkably handsome, tall, with the kind of presence that commands attention, even when he's trying to remain unnoticed. And his eyes. The court ladies whisper that his eyes are so beautiful they could make a woman forget her own name." That night, alone in her cottage, Soo-jin held the jade pendant up to the lamplight and examined it more closely. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see the royal seal worked into the phoenix's wing, so subtle that only someone who knew what it meant would recognize it. Everything made sense now. His education, his bearing, his certainty that they could have no future together. He had been kind to her, had cared for her in his way, but she had been foolish to imagine it could ever be more than a brief interlude in his real life. 2 months after Jae-woon's departure, the palace erupted in preparation for the most significant ceremony in decades. The missing crown prince had returned, and he was to be crowned king within the week following his father's sudden passing from fever. Soo-jin heard the news while grinding herbs, her hand stilling on the pestle as the implications washed over her. He was safe. That knowledge filled her with relief so profound it nearly brought her to her knees. But he was also now the king, placing him even further beyond her reach. 3 days before the coronation, Mi Young appeared with news that made Soo-jin's blood run cold. "There's to be a royal wedding immediately following the coronation," she announced breathlessly. The king is to marry Lady Soo-jin, daughter of the Minister of War. They say it's a love match, that the king specifically requested her hand. Each word was like a blade to Soo-jin's heart, but she forced herself to nod and make appropriate responses. She had been a fool to think their brief time together had meant as much to him as it had to her. That evening, as she sat in her cottage trying to summon strength for another day of pretending her heart wasn't broken, a soft knock came at her door. A palace guard in full ceremonial dress stood at her threshold. "Miss Min Soo-jin? His Majesty requests your presence in the Moonlight Pavilion, immediately. He said to tell you that a phoenix seeks its mate." The reference to the jade pendant made her knees weak. He remembered. The Moonlight Pavilion was aptly named, a delicate structure of carved wood and silk screens that seemed to float above a lotus pond. Lanterns hung from the eaves like captured stars, casting everything in warm, golden glow. He stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the open screen. He wore robes of deep blue silk embroidered with dragons in gold thread, the formal dress of a king, but she would have recognized the set of his shoulders anywhere. "Your Majesty," she said softly, dropping into the deepest bow she knew. "Don't," he said, turning to face her, and her breath caught. He no longer wore the silk mask. For the first time she could see his entire face, and the beauty of it nearly brought her to her knees. His features were perfectly sculpted, high cheekbones, straight nose, lips that seemed carved by a master artist. But it was his eyes that undid her. Those same dark, expressive eyes that had looked at her with such vulnerability, now shadowed with pain that seemed to echo her own. "Congratulations on your coronation, Your Majesty, and on your upcoming marriage." Something flickered across his face. Pain, regret. "You've heard? The entire palace speaks of nothing else. They say Lady Yoon is very beautiful." "She is," he agreed, and each word was like a knife to her heart. "She is everything a queen should be, noble, educated, accomplished." "Then you must be very happy." "Happy," he repeated, as if the word were foreign. "Yes, I suppose I should be." The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke again. "Do you remember what you told me about masks?" he asked quietly. "You said that some masks are necessary, but not with you. You said I could simply be Jae-woon there." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood scent that still clung to him. "I have been thinking about that conversation every day for 2 months," he said, "thinking about what it meant to be seen, truly seen, for who I am rather than what I represent." "Your Majesty, my name," he interrupted. "When we are alone, my name is still Jae-woon." "Jae-woon," she whispered, and saw him close his eyes as if her voice were a balm. "I have been king for 3 days," he said. 3 days of ceremonies and protocols and decisions that will affect thousands of lives. And through it all, I have thought of nothing but 4 days in a cottage where I was simply a man being cared for by a woman who asked nothing of me but honesty. Those days are over. You have responsibilities now, duties. "I know my duties," he said, and there was steel beneath the silk of his voice. "But I also know what I learned in your cottage, that a life lived only for duty is no life at all." Instead of answering directly, he reached into his robes and withdrew a scroll sealed with red wax. "This is a royal decree, signed and sealed with my authority as king. It declares that Lady Soo-jin, while a woman of great virtue and beauty, is not suited to be my queen, and that our betrothal is hereby dissolved." Soo-jin stared at the scroll in shock. "You cannot. The political implications. My father is dead," Jae-woon said gently but firmly. "And I am king now. I have spent my entire life being what others needed me to be, and I nearly lost myself completely. You saved me from that fate, Soo-jin. You showed me who I really am beneath all the expectations." He took her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I loved you when I thought I was dying in your garden. I loved you when you tended my wounds without asking who I was or what I could give you. And I love you now, when I finally have the power to choose my own fate. The court will never accept me, she whispered. I'm nobody, a servant, a commoner. You are the woman who saved my life, he said firmly. You are the woman who taught me what it means to be truly strong. If the court cannot see your worth, then they are blind, and I will help them learn to see clearly. And if they refuse, if they rebel against a king who marries beneath his station? A smile touched his lips, the first genuine smile she had seen since his return. Then they will learn that this king is not as easily controlled as they might have hoped. Will you have me? He asked. Not as a king seeking a queen, but as a man who loves you beyond reason or protocol? Soo-jin looked into his eyes and saw not the crown prince or the king, but Jae-woon, the man who had trusted her with his vulnerability, who had found peace in her simple cottage, who had chosen love over duty. Yes, she whispered, and the word was barely out of her mouth before his lips were on hers. The kiss was everything their restraint in the cottage had denied them. Passionate, desperate, full of 2 months of longing and the promise of a lifetime together. 3 days later, the palace witnessed a coronation unlike any in its history. King Lee Jae-woon was crowned in the morning ceremony, but the afternoon brought a surprise that sent shockwaves through the court: the immediate marriage of the new king to Min Soo-jin, the herb girl who had captured his heart. The ceremony was simple by royal standards, but breathtaking in its sincerity. Soo-jin wore robes of silk the color of cherry blossoms, with her hair adorned with jade ornaments that caught the light like captured starfire. But it was the look in her eyes as she knelt beside Jae-woon in the ancestral temple that truly took breath away. Pure, radiant love that transformed her from a pretty girl into a woman of luminous beauty. As they exchanged vows before the assembled court, Jae-woon spoke words that would be remembered for generations. I take you not because you are noble, but because you are good. Not because you bring political advantage, but because you bring wisdom. You are my heart's choice, my soul's recognition, my kingdom's greatest treasure. When Soo-jin spoke her vows, her voice was clear and strong. I promise to stand beside you not as your subject, but as your equal. To support you not because you are king, but because you are the man I love. To help you rule with wisdom and compassion, remembering always that true strength lies in service to others. The feast that followed was magnificent, but the most beautiful moment came when the new king and queen stepped onto the terrace overlooking the palace gardens. In the distance, Soo-jin could see the small cottage where their love had first bloomed, now illuminated by hundreds of lanterns in their honor. Do you regret it? Jae-woon asked softly, following her gaze. Leaving your simple life for all this complexity? Soo-jin turned to him, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. I regret nothing, she said firmly. That cottage will always be special to us. It's where we learn to love each other, but this is where we'll learn to love everyone else. As if summoned by her words, a phoenix appeared in the sky above them, its wings catching the last light of the setting sun as it soared over the palace walls. The assembled court gasped in wonder, taking it as an auspicious sign for the new reign. But Soo-jin and Jae-woon only had eyes for each other, knowing that they had found something rarer than any omen, a love that had transformed not just their own lives, but the very nature of the kingdom they would rule together. In the years that followed, their reign would be remembered as a golden age of compassion and wisdom, when the palace doors were opened to the common people and healing became as important as conquest. But it all began in a forgotten corner of a medicinal garden, where a wounded prince learned that the greatest crown of all is the one worn by a heart that chooses love over everything else.